going to read the ending of a story titled Gold, but which I keep referring to as the whales. So maybe that's what the title should be. There are just a few things you might want to know. The story is about a couple, Angie and Luke. Angie has experienced several miscarriages, and Luke, in an effort to draw her out of her grief, has suggested a vacation for a couple weeks in a cottage on the beach. The two of them are out combing the beach, looking for treasures, which is something that Luke keeps bringing to Angie. And Luke is far ahead of her in this scene, and Angie realizes that he's seen something devastating. Okay. Angie kept on toward the bend, where the grasses were thick on a high bluff. As she neared, the smell struck her first. It was the kind that catches in the nose, roots itself in memory. She felt her heart pick up pace, and she placed her hand over her chest. If she could manage not to be afraid, she told herself, then she would be okay. Whatever it was that happened to be around the bend. She stepped carefully over the rocks, not wanting to fall into the water that was churning at low tide. Luke followed her. He had picked up their cooler, the metal detector in their bag, and was moving slowly. As they struggled, she heard a long, low crying. It was a calling. Something, she felt, knew she was coming. She turned to ask Luke what she should be looking for, but he was too far behind. As she got closer and closer to the sharp bend, the cries became louder, sharp, pained, whimpering. She was looking down, watching her foot placement, and so when she did finally look up, she didn't just see what was happening, but felt it to the core. It stopped her where she stood, one foot firmly on the beach, the other sliding from a rock. The pilot whales, she knew them to be, were smaller than she'd imagined, more like dolphins in their appearance. An entire pod had thrown themselves against the shore. A few were stuck on the rocks, but most were being tossed back and forth in the rough surf, their bodies slamming against one another. The two closest to the rocks appeared to have taken the brunt of the beatings, and the water swirling around them was deep rust. Their obsidian skin, shimmering, reflected off of the surface of the sea. As though they were her own, she ran for them. She took her shirt off, stopped momentarily to remove her sneakers and the loose shorts she had chosen. In her bathing suit, without hesitating against the cold, she rushed the water. What do we do? Luke said, his hands checking his pockets. We left our phones at the house. Get help, she said. Go now. Run. She watched as he turned and headed up a steep bluff. With all her weight behind her, her feet dug deep in the sand, her knees locked, she managed to study the whales. And as she did, one by one, they let out a low, steady whistle as though reassuring one another that she was like them, of them. Panting, exhausted, she crawled to check on the last one. Too tired to fear it, she laid her head against the belly of the beast. The whale's flesh stank of the fishy odor of the sea, and bright red scrapes oozed blood, but the body was cool, and it calmed Angie as she steadied her own breathing. The animals quieted, and soon all that she could hear was the slapping of the waves against their bodies. She stood and measured the situation. She walked around them, checking for deep cuts. Most just had flesh wounds, deep bruising or scraped areas of the skin, and they allowed her to run her hands over them. Some tried to raise their heads, crooning their bodies to watch her, which made the whimpering return. She hummed to them, trying anything to soothe. They quieted to a steady murmur. Back on the beach, she quickly gathered the clothes that she had shed. She counted the whales again, 12, and realized there wouldn't be enough bandages. So instead, she began tearing the t-shirt and shorts into long strips. She emptied their cooler of his packed sandwiches in water. She carried it in a cloth back to the whales. She moved down the row, filling and carrying a cooler full of salt water to each whale, dumping it over the body, and again before moving to the next. On the whales with the deepest cuts, she dumped one of the cloths in the ocean, wrung it out, and placed it over the cut as though she were trying to get out a fever. She worked like this, watering, wringing, watering again, until her arms became sore, then numb, and finally limp, her own feet battered by the shell beach and rocks. And then at last, as though her pain had summoned them, the people came. They crested the bluff and descended upon the beach. With them, they brought towels, beach umbrellas, and buckets, both empty and full of bottled water. They moved silently at first, rising and falling as they made their way across the dunes, and then as they grew closer and larger in number, began calling out orders to one another, the sense of urgency from the scene taking shape. Small groups of men and women formed around each whale. The people bent over them, ran their hands down their bodies, and whispered softly, trying their best to comfort the cries that had begun again. Up and down the line, skin touched skin, bodies moved against bodies, and the whales, seemingly more and more aware of their predicament, called out to one another in a mournful song. The beach umbrellas were planted in the sand, the wings lifted upward, the nylon material spread out to offer shade. Blankets and towels were dipped in the salt water and carried, dripping into the whale's flesh. 2 by 2, the people waded into the water, filled their buckets with the salty brine, and lugged it back to submerge the cotton and the skin it covered. The children, excited and fearful, ran up and down the beach, offering bottled water to the people, consolation to the suffering. For hours they worked this way, until the sun began to dip and cast longer shadows. The water, which had calmed, began to churn again as it crept closer. Angie and Luke, who had joined the group formed around the whale that had been hardest hit, watched the water rise. A man who had been the quickest to assess the situation and take charge jogged down the line, calling out, "At high tide, remove them." As quickly as they had put them up, the people pulled down the umbrellas. They peeled off the bandages. The small groups formed again, and in them the whales were gently rocked back and forth as the towels and blankets were positioned beneath them, so that the whales were cradled in the stretchers that would carry them back to the sea. They waited this way, the people gripping the corners of the makeshift carriers against the tug of the ocean, until the water crept toward their knees and up their thighs. A collective count-off began, and on 3, Angie and Luke, along with the rest of their team, began to lift the whale. The pain in her shoulders and back intensified, and she used both arms to help drag the whale up and out of the surf and into deeper water. Angie looked up and down the beach at each group that was slowly, carefully moving their cargo, each one of them a pallbearer for the living. When they were up to their waists, they dipped their bodies down, hoisted the whale up onto their shoulders, and pressed forward. They ducked beneath the waves, but never did they lose their grip on the blanket and the body that they carried. They felt the whale begin to move, to struggle with them, until at last the woman up front beside Luke gave the ready, and they lifted their arms and pushed the whale free. All of them treaded water, watching the whales readjust and regroup. The people swam with arms at their sides, willing the current back to the deep so the whales could feel the water and know which way to turn. Almost as quickly as they had moved into the waves, the people turned and swam out. Angie was one of the last to come to shore, where she sank to her knees. Her hands, nearly blue from the effort and cold, stung and turned color. She opened and closed them, pumping them back to feeling. She scanned the beach for Luke. Finally, she looked up and saw him high above her on the bluff. His hands were cupped around his eyes, searching. Still just in her bathing suit, as so many of them were, she climbed the sand wall to meet him. "What are you doing?" she said, calling up to him, when she had nearly reached the top. He helped her up and steadied her. "Look," he said, grabbing her shoulders and turning her around to face the ocean. "What do you see?" His grip on her felt forceful. He shook her slightly. "What is it?" she asked again. She followed his eyes, but saw nothing necessarily out of place. "What am I supposed to see?" He let go of her then and opened his arms in a broad gesture. "Gold," he said. She looked again, out over the crowd of people. They were celebrating, their backs slick with sweat, their faces red from cold and pleasure. They were talking among themselves, smiling, some were laughing, some were gripping one another's shoulders, shaking hands, acknowledging the magic of the moment, that they had not lost even one. Behind them, bathed in the light of the now setting sun, the whales were diving, taking stock of their kind, singing out a sort of roll call, falling back into line. She imagined it from his perspective, high up there on the bluff, one body, one breath. She saw now that it held a glow, and that perhaps she too might give off a certain kind of shine. She closed her eyes. She wanted to remember the glow, to hold and cradle it inside her, because it was those beasts, these people, this gift of gold that would be the thing to sustain her.